Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours and Beyond the Headlines. It's now just over 6 weeks since the Taliban took over Kabul and with it the Afghan government. Since then, tens of thousands of Afghans have been trying to leave the country, many who've worked alongside Western forces fearful of their future under the new regime. Today we have two excellent guests who'll update us on the plight of some of those people, but also give us expert insight into the challenges that lie ahead for the country. First up, we have Lima Halima-Ahmad, who previously spoke with us earlier this year. Lima previously worked on women's leadership development as the gender director at Tetra Tech and USAID in Kabul, and then as monitoring and evaluation director with the administration office of the Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani. She's now working on a PhD at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Hello and welcome, Lima.
Thank you.
I think you're joining us from Washington now?
Yes.
Yeah, the last time I think we spoke to you, you were in Istanbul. We're going to come back to you in just a second. Also joining us, we have Jennifer Murtashvili. Jennifer is a founding director of the Center for Governance and Markets and associate professor at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Pittsburgh. Her research focuses on issues of self-governance, security, political economy, and public sector reform. Much of her work is focused on Afghanistan. Hello, Jen, and sorry for messing up your name.
Don't worry, I can't pronounce it.
The last time we spoke, Lima, you were in Istanbul, and as I recall, it's a fraught situation. You left Afghanistan last year. And for those who don't know, your sister was tragically targeted and killed in a car bomb last year in Kabul. And so really very much you and your family were directly under threat. Can you tell us what's been happening since the fall of Kabul, both to your family, but also friends and colleagues?
Thank you, Nick, for having me here. The last 6 weeks have been tough for all Afghanistan. And I could only speak of what I was involved. So my family, including my husband, Umid Sharifi, who is a well-known art management person in Afghanistan, all of them were in Afghanistan. And with the fall of the Taliban, airport being stuck, we were not able to either reach there or bring them to airport. So it has been a hard time. And right now, most of my family members are in different parts of the world in refugee camps. And I have been involved with different task force, trying to help some women at risk, trying to help them come out of Afghanistan in any way. But I think the world saw that the entire country is trying to leave. So I think this notion of Afghanistan being a terrorist state, or they are in favor of having Taliban back, should be now clear that I haven't seen any individual that is not looking for a way to go out. So if Taliban was a favorable government or a group that should lead the country, at least there should be some people to celebrate that. So the situation has been really bad. We have many people on the run in the country whose lives are really at risk, and many people that have left and are in these different refugee camps, so uncertain what will happen to them next, which countries they will be taken, even if they will be taken, what is next for them. Even for myself, Nick.
Can you give us some examples? Because it's I guess many people watching this, one needs to be very clear. Possibly, I know you're in contact with some people in Kabul. There's some people going to the border with Iran and also border with Pakistan. Can you just give us some examples of people you've been dealing with and trying to help?
The people that I'm dealing with are usually young women, young artists, the people that they think there is no way they can survive the country. The biggest shock for Afghan young people, especially this Generation Z who were born after the Taliban, they didn't know the kind of violence that they will be facing. For them, it was totally unknown. How could someone not go to school? How someone not be able to listen to music? How the colors will disappear from the country? and how you will not have a say when a complete ministry of women and some other ministries will be diminished, how women will not be able to go to colleges. So these were the fears, and now they are seeing it. They only heard it in stories from us or from their parents, but now they saw it. So the people who are living, most of them are young people. They just don't want to live in that kind of situation. And right now, the 125,000 people that are airlifted by the US military mission in Kabul, most of them are uncertain what will happen. I mean, in Afghanistan, everybody, they don't speak English. They are educated in Afghan languages in universities. After that, what is next for them? That is something, I don't think so it was a solution to just take the entire population that is not okay with this government and see that as a long-term solution. For me, I am almost last year PhD. I don't see what is next for me because my expertise lies everything in Afghanistan. So what am I supposed to do next? Now I have to start from zero where I'm going with life. So the situation like that is not only where we see that women are completely blocked from public lives. Maybe you would see some protests and stuff in some big provinces where there is still a little bit international media which can cover, but in far provinces and districts, women's lives have come to zero, like they don't have any public life anymore. And that in 2001 or in 80s, because of the civil war, it might have sense that, oh, there is war, we should be home and stuff. Right now, it is like, what does that mean? How do you comprehend when half of the population is told you can't come out, you can't participate in the society? And I have many friends and family where the family is led by a woman and there is no any male bread earner. So what about those families? They are still at home, they are still in Afghanistan. So the last 6 weeks, Nick, for me, I'm not able to process that, how the world will allow the country to be like that, how the world will allow the country to be run by terrorists, not even talk about Taliban, by Haqqani group. There are many, many members of them in the current Taliban's cabinet.
And do you hold the Haqqani network responsible specifically for your sister's death?
Honestly speaking, I would not call Haqqani or Taliban or anyone, because this war was responsible. Like this whole thing. I mean, for me, who Taliban are? They are not an organic national uprising. It was a project of some Eastern country where they wanted the civil war to be done, and they brought this project. Right now, why Taliban? They don't have a base anywhere, because they are not people that, oh, they came up as any other group that you might have seen in the world where they wanted to fight the foreigners. No, they wanted their own power, and most of them are foreigners themselves. So for me, who killed it? Of course, this war, it could be Taliban, it could be Haqqani, it could be the government. I mean, we don't know. Nobody told us who killed her. Her car was bombed. The bomb was in her car. So for us, my family and myself, we were kind of justifying her death for the women empowerment, for education, for progress in my country. Now for us, her death is equal to nothing. For what cause she was killed, and like her, thousands of her, because we are again where we were. We are again struggling with the question, why a woman should be told, or a girl should be told not to go to school in 21st century in 2021. That is something where we are struggling with to comprehend why the world is still fine by this. How can we, a corner of the world, allow where whatever we know by the name of human rights violations, that is happening, and still we think we are tired, it's fatigue, we can't deal with it.
Okay. And your parents, where are they now?
They're in one of those refugee camps. We were able to take them out in the last few days from the Kabul airport. So my mother was beaten by the Taliban, and my younger brother was beaten by the Taliban. So it was a difficult time to take them out, and they did like at least 7 trips to the airport, unsuccessful. And finally, they pushed through, and they were allowed to go inside the gates. And then they stay inside the airport for almost 48 hours to be able to get on some of the flights.
Right. And what's your hope? I'm going to talk to Jennifer in a second, because I know she's involved in a process of trying to help people. What is your hope with them? Would you? I mean, you presume you'd like to be reunited with them in the States if possible?
Yeah, in the States or anywhere safe. At this point, I think for family like mine or myself, it's luxury that we are alive, because there are so many like us still stuck in Afghanistan and still at the dire risk of being killed. Nick, for the past 20 years, I don't know who would say that, oh, there were few people who work with a Westerner or with American. The entire country was working, because the entire country was run by the aid money. So everybody was paid by an American if they were working. So it means that everyone's life is at risk. It was not a short time, it was 20 years, 2 decades. So there are a lot of people still there. So for me and myself, we don't know what will happen to them, where they will be sent. But with the hope, because there is no plan, there was no plan that they will be taking this many people out and what they will do with it. So the people like myself who is so involved, who has network, we still don't know what will happen to them. Even they will be brought here in the US, or some other country will accept them as a refugee. But for us, they being alive, and especially for myself, who just saw one family member being brutally killed, for me, it is luxury, and I'm grateful they are alive right now.
Yeah, okay. Well, in a moment, I want to come back and ask questions about what Afghanistan faces. And part of that really acknowledges that the country has changed, and there's this sense that there were achievements made over the past 2 decades, and that the Taliban are not dealing with the country that they, governed at the end of the 1990s. So there's a different reality there. And I do want to come back to you to talk about that, because you had significant roles in part of those changes. So I do want to come back and talk to you about that in a second. But let's bring in Jennifer Murtashvili. Jennifer, you spent quite a bit of time in Afghanistan. As I said in the introduction, you look at issues of governance, basically seeing what projects, what effect and impact they have, but looking at the idea of governance itself. And I'll come on to that in a second. But first of all, I know you've been trying to help many Afghan individuals and families with an initiative at your university. Can you just talk a bit about that?
Sure. We began our work in early August when the US government announced the P2 visa program. And this visa program expanded the category of people who were eligible to travel to apply for asylum in the United States. Originally, it was just these military translators, and that was reported on very broadly, this SIV visa program. In early August, this was expanded to just about anybody who worked on US government contracts and grants with NGOs. So this was, I mean, as Lima said, this was hundreds of thousands of people because so many people have been involved in this project over the past 20 years. So I started getting messages from friends and colleagues who I've known for the past 20 years, since I began working in Afghanistan. And they were asking me for one thing. They said, we worked for a project, but we have no idea how to find the people who we worked for. This was 15 years ago. This was 8 years ago. And these are very well-educated people who have now senior positions in the government or work for UN agencies, for example. So I started helping these friends, and then I got more and more requests, and I asked some students of mine to help connect these Afghans with their former employers so they could apply for this asylum program. This was before the fall of Kabul. We announced, so then I said, let's open this program up to the public, and maybe we could help others now that we figured out this project, this program. So then I was able to get about 10 student volunteers in my university, and we had about 400 requests, and we were working, through them. Then Kabul fell. And now we have more than 5,000 people who have applied to us, asking us to help them with this verification program, connecting them with their former employers. And we have close to 100 volunteers who are working on this. So it's really quite a huge effort. And we're really grateful for all of the volunteers. Many Afghan Americans are working with us. We have famous professors of international security who are not at my university who have really stepped up. So it's quite remarkable to see how people are just so supportive of the Afghans who are, find themselves in this really terrible situation. And I should say that, the nature of our work really changed after the withdrawal stopped. And this was on August 31st when the US, ceased these flights. I mean, we were working so hard to get people like Lima on these airplanes. And this really went beyond our mission of just connecting people with this visa application program. But I should say that there's no reason why we should have student volunteers working on this. I'm very grateful to them. This has been the most meaningful work that they have had in their lives. So many of them have said that this is something that they will never forget as long as they live, and has had such a personal impact on them. But their work is the consequence of the fact that our US immigration policies and programs to help these Afghans is just so broken. The US knew that it was withdrawing. The US has been withdrawing from Afghanistan since 2009. President Obama began that withdrawal process in a famous speech at West Point when he announced a military surge, and then said that we will begin to withdraw troops, hoping for a final withdrawal in 2014. So the US has announced these withdrawals for more than a decade. We were so unprepared, and this is a real shame. It's a mark of shame on the US government. There were many gains in Afghanistan over these years, but there's so many things that could have gone so much better with our assistance programs to Afghanistan during these decades.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much indeed for that, Jen. Lima, I do want to ask some difficult questions here. And the thrust of this is that this is a mission that failed. You've been let down, you've been betrayed. Certainly US troops have pulled out and have left people in the lurch, hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the lurch. But the broader project, the idea of creating a stable government that serves the Afghan people, has failed. And I want to try and understand why that's the case. But I also want to understand, perhaps on the positive side, how much Afghan society has changed. So just to start with, Lima, can you just talk about what you did in your job when you were working alongside former President Ashraf Ghani in the office that assessed? I mean, I think you have to describe the actual work yourself, because I don't want to sort of superimpose anything of you. But you were the monitoring and evaluation director within the administration office. What were you trying to do to achieve there?
So, of course, I mean, your first part of your question, that what went wrong. I mean, a lot of things went wrong, not only at the international community level, but also at the local level. But not as much as anything went wrong was how we responded to that with this withdrawal, as looking at like if you are looking at any young democracy which was completely like a broken state, a state which went through almost 40 years of war, and then were this dark time of the Taliban where it was isolated from the world. And then we bring in billions and billions of dollars of aid economy and trying to impose a system or a way of governance where we think it's gonna work, but then everybody is welcoming it because it is bringing dollars with it, rather than saying it's fit for the society, or an organic system could be mishmash with it that would work for both sides. So things a lot at bigger level went wrong. But as my role with the government, I just worked for 1 year there, because when Ashraf Ghani came to power, at that time he announced that he wanted to work with young people. He wants to get rid of all the old, like the power used to be in old people's hands from centuries in Afghanistan. So people like myself, I was working with the UN at that time. A lot of us, we resigned from our position. We just joined even with lesser salaries in the government. So my role specifically was to do the assessment of all line ministries and see how the donor projects and the government projects are aligning together. Because in Karzai's time, this was believed that there was huge corruptions going on. Donor agencies were doing all the duplicates programs, not talking to each other, not reporting to the government, and government was also doing some kind of duplicates projects. So my job was just to see how the system works. If you could find a unified system where you can look into the projects, if one donor project is doing something, so the other have to do another part of it rather than doing something similar and spending money. At the time I was working, I found out only in the Ministry of Interior Affairs, the police were trained by 22 countries and the 22 donor countries were not talking to each other. So my role was that, but for the first 6 months of my assignment with that job, I was able to do a lot. But then looking as a woman at that position, I think that position was not even there before my arrival. There was a lot of challenges in a way that I had to be either corrupt or not touch certain areas, because for the past 15 years, a mafia of corruption was being there. Like the reports that I was producing, those reports should have put a lot of people in jail. And some people were, at least including one ministers and few directors, they were losing jobs and they were stuff. But then after the 6 months, there was a dead drop that I was not allowed to do my job. And I cannot go into detail who and how, but there was a point where I felt that if I'm not impactful, then why I should be there? Because I was not allowed to do everything. I was told that, Lima, you are going so fast in this country where corruption is at such a big level that is not only Afghans, internationals are involved also, because my expertise more security area. So my linear more was to the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior Affairs. In those areas, the biggest corruption was happening because the biggest money of the US were going there. So after a while, I realized that I was blocked from doing my job. And that's why that was the case where I resigned and came here to start my PhD studies. But overall, saying that this is one of the experiences, maybe so many people, they didn't decide to leave. They say, like, if I stay in the government, maybe I will be able to bring change. And so many people were not able to do that. They were just there. They were just positioned. Young people were just there to fill positions, but not given authority. After even I left, we were hearing that the power was really centralized. They were taking all the power from the provinces, from every directorate. Everything was brought back to the center and the palace, where everything was micromanaged by there. And then the issue of ethnicity was mixed in with. In my whole 1-year assignment, I never felt the need to meet the president, although I should be reporting to him. But then there was a time that every small, tiny project or report had to be explained to him. And how come one president looking into country and just micromanaging like that? And then with that micromanagement, how much you have time to look into the bigger issues, what is happening in the provinces, what is happening at the security level, how your media and communication is running away. Because when I was here in school, I was still like working in some policy briefs and sending it to some friends in the government, that we see that Taliban are taking over social media. They are successful. Why the government is not talking? Like, why the government doesn't have the same kind of propaganda team to say these are the successes? People are happy with what we are doing. So, but there was this way of, no, we know what is happening. And of course, we saw this was wrong. Even President Ghani came here a few weeks ago to the Washington, D.C., and he told President Biden, I got everything covered. So if he got everything covered, then why he ran away after a week or so? So yeah, that will be my answer, that what went wrong. And a lot of things went wrong just with the perception that the world expectation of in 20 years, you should have a democracy that was imposed. And a lot went wrong when Afghans were given only two choices, Taliban or the Western way of democracy. That is wrong. I mean, why Afghans are not asked what do they want? Why there has to be only a choice that I should wear a burqa and put it home, or I should implement the corrupt way of how democracy is being implemented? Why the freedom of speech is only called democracy? Why it shouldn't be something that Afghans wants to call it?
Okay. Lima, thank you so much. I mean, there's a huge amount packed in there. You've talked about corruption, which is routinely leveled at, Afghan leaders, a centralized system, a president, the most recent president who wants to look at the sort of minutiae of things. There's a lot to unpick here. Jennifer, I know these are areas that you've been looking at quite specifically. And I think it's worth going back, perhaps, to the very early, to the start of the Western intervention in Afghanistan and the structure that NATO and the sort of Western powers decided to go with. Can you just talk a bit about that as the sort of nub of this problem?
Sure. After the fall of the Taliban in 2001, there was a Bonn conference, the conference in Bonn, Germany, that established this interim government that later became the Afghan government. And basically what happened there was that the international community resurrected the 1964 constitution, which was based on the constitutional monarchy. And what happened from there is that the international community took the power of the monarchy, the king, and the prime minister, combined it into one and created a very, very powerful president. And so over the next several years, there were debates about what kind of constitution Afghanistan should have. And the international community in the United States, very specifically, was very supportive of a very centralized state. Now, many people involved in that process now say that this wasn't the case, but there are many reports from that time, even WikiLeaks cables, that show that the United States was very supportive of the centralized system. Now, why does that matter? Excuse me. It matters because this centralized system, based on the monarchy, based on this old system of government, is exactly what drove, many people to become part of an insurgency, during the Soviet period. The Soviets actually strengthened many of these centralized institutions that the United States resurrected after 2001.
I'm struck also by how similar it is to modern Russia, with the Kremlin and also the governors who are dependent upon the
It is exactly. And in fact, I'm working on a book right now with a colleague from Afghanistan, Mohammad Qadam Shah, and he's a constitutional scholar. And we were actually looking at how so many of the bureaucratic regulations at the Ministry of Interior and many other areas were actually from the Soviets, that the United States came in and resurrected old Soviet style institutions. And many of them were actually from this period of the Soviet influence, including the budgeting system, the public finance system. And these, why does this matter? Well, it matters because this is all technical political science. But if I started working in villages in 2005, 2006, and at that time, there was so much support from people in rural areas for this new democracy. Right. And I think, as Lima rightly points out, this term democracy has now become really associated with the West. It's the word itself is associated with corruption. It's either the Taliban or democracy. This is not just unique to Afghanistan. I see this in many other countries in the world where the word democracy isn't about the values or ideas. It's about US foreign policy, or it's about corruption or aid. So people were expecting something so different, especially outside of Kabul. They expected to be able to elect their local leaders. They said, oh, this is democracy. We're going to have something different. But if you're a villager and you live in a rural area, your local government official is your district governor. And what did a rural person experience? The district governor is appointed by Kabul just the same way as it had been under the monarchy, as it had under the Taliban, as it had under the Soviets.
And Jennifer, you also talk about a rentier system where essentially, because there's so much money being pumped into the country, there's no responsibility that goes with it.
Absolutely. So one of the things I found was that this traditional system of governance actually became stronger during the past 20 years. And I tried to understand why that was, because many people in the West would say, oh, it's because Afghans are backwards or they're traditional or they're Islamic. No, this system is accountable to people. So they pay a little bit of money and they hold that local leader accountable for every cent that they give him or her. I even found women leaders in some parts of rural Afghanistan. But with the government, they know the government's getting all of this money. They watch all the corruption in the rural development programs that they're supposed to be receiving all of this aid. Yet I ask people, why don't you complain about that? It's so much more money than the pennies you're giving to your village leader. They say it's not our money, it's someone else's money. And in fact, they should know that this is all corrupt. Why do they want this to be used this way? So then lots of conspiracy thinking, about why the US is giving money to all of these people, because they know what accountability means. They hold their resources locally accountable, and they would expect that the US would be doing the same. So it really, this rentier system with so much money pumped into the government really severed this linkage between the citizens and the people, because governments didn't have to rely on people for taxes. They didn't have to rely on them for anything. So they took them for granted. And the only thing that mattered was this really corrupt system that Lima has so eloquently described.
And really, you're talking about concepts that apply to governance, wherever. This is not necessarily about Western intervention, although in this case it clearly is. But it's about, yeah, go on.
Yes, absolutely. And this sort of rentier dynamic, as we call it, it can occur when you have lots of aid, but it also occurs when you have lots of oil wealth. So we in economics, we say it's when resources come from non-productive sources of the economy. So usually this is resource, oil, or mineral wealth. If you look at a lot of the Gulf Arab countries, it's the same thing, is that the rulers don't have to look to their citizens for taxes. And so they don't have to be accountable to them. That linkage between taxation and accountability is so, so crucial for the functioning of a state and for the functioning of a democracy. Absolutely.
Now, Lima, the reality is that Kabul, as we were saying earlier, and Afghanistan is a very different place to what it was 2 decades ago.
It
would seem to me that the Taliban recognize that, because otherwise they wouldn't be operating such as a savvy media campaign. At the same time, I know what you fought for over the last 20 years seemed to be all in vain. But the reality on the ground in Afghanistan is very different. The Taliban are going to have to deal with women who've got different expectations. I mean, what I'm really trying to say is that, isn't that something that you can engage with? You can't abandon all hope. There must be things there that have been in place over the last 2 decades that constrain the Taliban.
I mean, obviously it does. I mean, there is still this uncertain kind of notion among the people, especially the women group, that our network that we are all kind of mobilizing, that there is no way at this age or at this kind of era in Afghanistan we will allow this kind of atrocity to happen. I will just give you a few statistics. For the last 20 years, I collected this data in 2019, but I'm sure it was better than that now. We had 4,300 national police and National Army Afghan women. We had 3,500 women doctors. We had 1 million university students only in big cities. We had more than 66,000 female teachers. We had more than 3.5 million students in the cities, not even districts. There were more than 800 women businesses that had 77 million per year income. So there are statistics where we can even combine women activism compared to 20 years before. Taliban cannot even produce what women were producing 6 weeks before. So it is totally unbelievable how Taliban will take over even the first few nights, because my husband was there, my family was there. They were seeing that Taliban are confused. They didn't know the Even the Kabul, the city, how they will function. They didn't know how many young people are there where they don't know how to face them. But what is more shocking than that, where you see international organizations like UN, when kind of atrocities that are happening, which was happening in 90s, like in Herat, 2 people were hanged, and they still allow it. And then you see people being killed and tortured that in all over the world, it is not allowed anymore by the human rights kind of defenders, but it is happening. So those things are scaring people. But the mobilizations, even the people who are outside, if I tell you that I might be sleeping only 2 hours per 24 hours, and like myself, there are so many Afghans who are not giving up. They are with whatever they could, if it is social media activism, if it is writing, if it is still mobilizing resources on the ground to not kill the attention of the world on Afghanistan, because we kind of see it slowly because we normalize it. For us, it is so shocking that how US allowed Haqqani group, even the 4 members that were on the run kind of terrorists, they are now in the ministry, and US is dealing with that kind of country as a partner country now. So for us, it is even shocking how that terrorist group
isn't the whole thing about this is it's realpolitik. I mean, we could talk about how the US and how the West failed to help construct a state, and we've given some analysis of that, and we have done on previous programs. But politics is the art of the possible, and the West no longer has the ability to appoint the Minister of the Interior or protect a women's ministry. These things are out of your control, aren't they?
But I think even that is even show off kind of a reality for Afghans. I mean, you asking me as an Afghan woman, I don't think so. Taliban won. I mean, how they won it, that is another thing. I think it was given. They didn't fight. They won it because I think US gave up, or the international community gave up. I don't want to believe a country like US or the international community together, NATO together, they didn't have a power to hold group of thugs like Taliban. Why they were not able to do these things for the last 20 years. There were only 2,500 troops sitting in Bagram, not even fighting. So for me, it is a failure that the world said, like, I'm going to take on, not that I fought it with fists and lost it. So yes, this is politics, but what does this mean for the world, not even for Afghanistan or for the region? What this means that now these groups of people, they have access to much more larger weaponaries and advanced kind of system. Now they have access to economy. Now they have access to bargaining. Like they are bargaining on women. I will give women more rights if you give me international recognitions. If you allow me sit in the UN, I will allow women to go to school. Before they didn't have that power. We gave it to them. They didn't want that kind of power. They have now pilots, which we trained for the last 20 years with American money. Now they have access to those pilots and those special forces. So for me, it is the real politics, but what does this mean? Like Haqqani group, where their living and training was on terrorism, are we expecting that they will become a civil group now? Or a political group now? That for me would be a big mistake, where still the second day they arrive, they announce that they want to help Kashmiri in Pakistan or on Indian side. So for the people who are trained to kill, trained to go and fight, we are now expecting to run a country. It is hard to believe that that will be something happening.
Okay. I'd love to get people's questions now. Please do put your questions in the Q&A box. There's tons here to look at. The questions of aid, humanitarian aid, Afghanistan's debt, relations in the region. You know, what does China may have views and influence in Afghanistan? It may not have that much influence. I'd love to get everyone's questions and thoughts in the Q&A box, and we can start putting those questions to both Lima and Jennifer. Jennifer, I can just turn to you. A year ago, I think you actually advocated that the West should get out of Afghanistan. Why was that?
I didn't, it wasn't an advocation that the US should leave. I did think that the US should leave because The longer the US was there, especially over the past 6 or 7 years, the worse the outcomes were for the people of Afghanistan that I did not see. For example, let's look at northern Afghanistan for a second. I know a lot of attention has been focused on Kabul, and rightly so. Since 2013, 1/3 of the population has been displaced. 1/3 of the population of the North has been displaced due to war and fighting. There has been, the government only controlled 30% of the territory of the country. I didn't see that the US understood how to use its leverage. It was spending so much money, and it was making things worse over time, not better. Yes, in Kabul, things were different than it was in the rest of the country. But I think in the eyes of many Afghans, the international project, for the reasons that Lima has articulated, had been seen as very spoiled, and it wasn't owned by Afghans. And if it was owned by a government that was seen as increasingly corrupt. I didn't understand why the US wasn't putting more pressure on Ashraf Ghani to change his ways. He became an authoritarian leader who was very isolated with his small group in the presidential palace that actually had no reach or no legitimacy. So how could the US, continue doing this? And so this idea that if the US stayed and stayed and stayed, I would not have been surprised if the Taliban took so many of these cities this summer with the US presence there. This is a counterfactual that we're not thinking of, but I don't think it took the US withdrawal of the Taliban to take these cities and towns. They were preparing for this, and the US wasn't really involved in a combat operation. It hadn't been since 2014. It had a very confused and unclear mission. And so it's asking a lot of the American people to continue to supporting a war that it couldn't really articulate. It was asking American soldiers to die for this. And yes, we may agree on the cause and how important it is to be in Afghanistan, but I'm not convinced the US was really quite capable. This was,
so,
heartbreaking.
Are you saying
yes.
now then, without the US in the picture, supporting that centralized system, a rentier sort of political system, that the questions that you think should have been asked will begin to be asked? Is that? I mean, that might be sounds slightly naive in a way, doesn't it?
No, I mean, it is absolutely naive, but I mean, what other choices do we have? This is the conversation that we should have been having 5 years ago, right? With the government of Afghanistan, is how do you increase their accountability? But the US I don't understand how we could have so incapably run this intervention for the past 20 years. I mean, if anybody, it has been well chronicled. There are the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, these CIGAR reports, has chronicled all of this, all of the things that Lima has described. Yet we're talking about two imperfect solutions, right? Two very imperfect solutions. You either have the Taliban on one hand or this US-backed intervention on the other, which was losing so much support of the people of Afghanistan for so long. It's like people were stuck. People are so stuck, they didn't know who to support. They didn't, they felt like the government. And when we look at the collapse of the army and the security forces, and I'm sure this is something Lima can talk about as a defense expert here, here in the United States, we're hearing all this discussion very technically about logistical support and air support and all of these technical things that went wrong. And this is why the army collapsed. But if you're a soldier and you're fighting on those front lines and you're faced with a choice of who do I fight for right now? And the Taliban have these videos and they're saying, if you just surrender, we won't kill you. You can go back to your villages, no problem, right? Are you going to fight for this government? Who are you going to fight for? People need something, an idea, something to fight for. And if the US couldn't articulate what that was, if the Afghan people couldn't articulate, what that was, it was very difficult, I think, for the US to stay under those circumstances.
Lima, I mean, it's a fair point. I mentioned this in the last session we had on Afghanistan. I was speaking to a former British diplomat. He said, look, I think the Taliban takeover is a good thing. It really essentially means the end of the conflict, and that means less dead people. At a very fundamental level, the end of a conflict, the dramatic reduction in conflict must mean an improvement for people's lives.
I think here in the West, especially, I have a problem where we look at any issue really simplistically. It's not simple. Yeah. In 2006, I think, I believe, or even before that, Taliban leaders, they came back and they wanted part of the government. They wanted to negotiate peaceful one. Yeah. US denied, Karzai denied. That was the end of war in Afghanistan. But we said, no, you have lost. No, we will not talk. They went back and they found some other sponsors, and those sponsors are not some local leaders. They are countries like Pakistan, in Iran, in Russia, in China. And they became who they are today that we are dealing with. And then we bring it back to, oh, less killing or then a dark time. So giving these kind of answers is really not making us Afghans feels good that we are given choices, because yes, killing will stop. But how do you know killing will stop? Because right now, Taliban are not even one group of Taliban. What you hear in Kabul, that is not happening. In Kabul, they say we didn't sanction or we didn't allow these public hanging. We don't allow all these revenge killings and tortures, but it is happening in all different parts of the country. So for us, what Jennifer really explained it well, the US really, since the Iraq invasion, the US really paid little attention. Yes, the dollar was poured in the country, but the dollar was poured with all these international companies that they were bringing most of the money back to the US. The corruption was at the level where small people in Afghanistan, like if an American contractor is taking 1 or 2 million, if I take few 100,000, why not go with that? So the situation was kind of like that. People in the center was busy in dividing dollars, and they really paid attention to people, what the people were saying. People were saying there is no job, there is no food, the quality of life is becoming so expensive, the salaries the government is providing is not enough. So if it is not enough, there is opportunity for the corruption also. There was a time where the super powerful civil society of Afghanistan were shouting towards the world what is happening on the ground. There were so many shadow reports of what Jennifer was talking about. The world was reading them coming out, but why they were not listening to them as an early warning what was happening, why we didn't change our strategy from the day we entered to Afghanistan in 2001 until we were living. The whole thing was we went there to kill Osama and we killed it and we came back. But I don't think it was true. For the last 20 years, so many goals and so many objectives were being implemented but everything was just ad hoc level on the basis of who needs what, rather than thinking on the governance level. A group has come 3 times, like let's negotiate. If you can bring on the previous warlords like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and all Northern Alliance, Taliban is also one of the group and also created like a foreign project. Bring it on them, like if everybody is stealing, let's them also be part of the stealing. But the point here was the ignorance of what our own projects could become to us, because I think US being there was not that I'm there helping this country or having a base there. There is China on the border, there is Pakistan on the border, there is Iran on the border. And your old Cold War partner, Russia, yes, it might not be directly involved, but I don't think so it will see you be successful in a region like that.
Okay, let's bring in some questions. I mean, I think we're going to sort of shift to what's happening now as well. Sarah Biffin, go ahead and ask your question, please.
I wanted to know if you could tell us anything about the situation in Kabul at the moment, whether all the normal services that we expect are running, like the hospitals, the rubbish collection, and the lighting in the streets.
And I'm going to say that this is my mother, and and you traveled to Afghanistan in the about 70, 71, didn't you?
I went there in 72 to Herat, and it seemed to me totally medieval.
Right, a long time ago, yeah, and a long time ago.
With colourful tribal men driving horses and colourful plumes and flowing beautiful robes. Absolutely medieval.
Lima, what is the situation now? So I mean, this is really the critical thing. What is happening now? Do we get a sense of the Taliban's approach to governance, to governing? I mean, anecdotally, what are you hearing, Lima?
No. So I think things are not blocked. The first thing we hear when they came, so all the TV channels like music and everything stopped, and most TV channel either stopped or there was one Talib person being installed there to read the news. Some private TV channels still might have some female, but not as before. Electricity in Afghanistan, Sarah, it was before also not that you would have electricity most of the time, but now it is the same. But there is the government is on the leave. There is no, like, because the aid money was frozen, so there is no salaries, there is nothing. Some of the employees of some ministries, only male, are called back for work, but they are told that they will be given in grain, like we don't have cash money, so wheat or rice or something will be given to them as a salary until they figure out from where they find the money. So the money is blocked, and there is this situation that, which is hurtful, that there is bargaining. If you do this, I will allow you, but you could have done that before in a more well-systematic way. But right now, Taliban are breaking a lot of the systems of removing some ministries, some municipalities, and completely changing it to the other. So there is not this chaos where we believe that they will be coming and killing everyone. That is not happening yet. But of course, people are told, be turned on the street if a woman is without burqa. Then you will see also in the media where there are young people who are protesting. So they are obviously scared of the media. But things are happening where everybody is sitting at home and there is no money in the banks, and people are asking, like, we are even sending money through Awalas and through Western Union. That has opened in a few days. So there is a big chances that it will economically break. Like, people won't have food. Before even fall of the Taliban, there was this huge internal displacement because of the war. So many people came to the cities. Now it is even becoming worse.
That's absolutely, I mean, I'm aware in many conflicts from being a journalist, sometimes after a major conflict, there's a vacuum. And what happens in that vacuum period is absolutely critical in terms of who takes over, what happens there afterwards. Jen, I want to come to you now, because this is an interesting question. If you're looking at well, first of all, can the Taliban govern? We've seen their cabinet. What do you think of it? But the second question, which follows on from that, is that if they're not very good at governing, what hope do you have for governance? What's there on the ground? And then I guess thirdly, what can be done to help shape that? Because if they're after money, if they're trying to get access to the central bank reserves, the US has got control of that. Western powers have got money. Lima, you may want to comment on that, whether that kind of money should be at their disposal, for stability. But Jen, you first.
I mean, it's a great question. And I think that, sure, the Taliban can, I mean, they can if they want. There's people in the country who can help them govern. I think the question is, will they? Do they have the will to govern in a way that will lead the country into a better place? And right now they seem so focused on consolidating power, right? So it was one thing to run this insurgency campaign, to seem quite united to do it, to defeat a common enemy. But like so many other things, whether you're running an insurgency or whether you're running for an office as a politician, you're going to say one thing and you're going to do another when you govern. And so that's the reality that they're faced with right now. They don't have the capability to govern because that's not what they were built for. But on the other hand, they do have some experience in rural areas where they have governed almost untouched for 2 decades. So to say that they don't have experience, I think is wrong, is a misunderstanding. But it is a specific kind of governance that I'm not sure is well suited for the entire country, and nor is it able to do things at such a large scale that's required of a national government. So so there's also this double-edged sword of aid. Right. So one of the issues that they face right now is really a legitimacy question. In some ways, not having this aid, yes, it's bad for very bad for the people, but you can see that this helps them consolidate their power a little more, because they can say, look, the previous rulers were all these foreign puppets. This wasn't us. Look, we are different. They're not giving us money. And it allows them to sort of consolidate who they are during this vacuum period. On the other hand, they're playing all of these games with women's rights right now, with the inclusivity of the government. They're using women's rights as a bargaining chip. You know, a lot of people are saying, oh, they don't believe in women's rights. It looks like they're willing to bend on these issues, or to at least use them as a bargaining chip. What they believe is a different matter, but they're willing to use it as a bargaining chip. They're putting a lot of pressure on women's issues right now for the international community to come in and say, okay, you know, if you change, we'll give you access to the resources. This is the game they're trying to play, it seems to me. But this is a very dangerous game for them in terms of their own legitimacy, because they'll turn into the same thing that they criticized the government before, of having access to the resources, becoming a puppet of foreign powers and so forth. And also, the longer they're there, they become very much more reliant on Pakistan to govern. I think that's something that we see as well. And their relationship with Pakistan will also turn them into foreign agents in the eyes of the people. They said, no, that government, the previous government, they were the puppets, we're the real thing, we're legitimate. And so you can see how these dynamics with both aid, using gender and all of this inclusivity stuff as bargaining chips in the relationship with Pakistan really does threaten their legitimacy. And the real danger of this is you have groups like ISIS who are waiting and watching this. And, you know, there is this conflict between the Taliban and ISIS. And if the Taliban bend too much, I think, in the moving towards the West, moving towards this foreign assistance and the international recognition, it becomes so important to them. This gives ISIS huge leverage. Something else I worry about, what happens to all of those groups, for example, in northern Afghanistan, who were associated with those warlord factions? Well, those groups are gone. They have not delivered, but yet there is still really deep resentment of the Taliban amongst other groups. And you have to worry that ISIS now becomes an important source of resistance against the Taliban for people who do not like the Taliban, who see the Taliban as representing one ethnic group, you know, primarily the Pashtuns. And we saw that in their government. So this is another dynamic that we should really keep our eye on.
What a grim thought. Lima, this is horrible for you. You have been betrayed essentially by the West. What does the West do now? I mean, in terms of those, bargaining chip issues, the leverage that the West has, what leverage the West has, what should they be doing?
They should be listening to Afghans. I mean, the West should not consider or give themselves the right who Afghans are, who not, because even people like me, I am considered not Afghan woman, because why? I am educated or I could speak their language. So for me, the question is, who is Afghan woman? The one who is victim? That is what the standard of Afghan woman it is for you. So I think the West right now, as Jennifer said, like Taliban are doing this, but why we are putting Taliban or the rest of the country separately? Like now, Taliban has to replace the entire country and run something. There was a government there. There was a system there for 20 years. When the Taliban came, why they have to replace everything? For example, one part of the Sarah's questions, which I missed, was that are hospital there? Yes, there are hospitals, but every 30 minutes, a woman dies because of the maternity complications. Now, when the money is completely stopped, what happens now? Now that we don't have half of the population working, what happens now?
You're saying that humanitarian aid should continue.
It should continue, but not
grants from places like the World Bank, not debt relief, that kind of thing.
For me, it should be like, why you have to repeat the same mistake that you were doing with the previous centralized government?
Yeah.
Why there shouldn't be more inclusive methods of civil society, women, different kind of mechanism to come together and decide.
Those are questions for the Taliban, which I guess they're not necessarily going to be listening to you. And the questions I'm asking are about is how Western governments that do have leverage and other powers like, Qatar has got leverage. There are other governments. Pakistan has got leverage as well. There are governments outside of Pakistan outside of Afghanistan that do have leverage with Afghanistan.
But that leverage means like power, money, and Taliban needs that. that leverage means recognitions. So if the goal of Western government, Taliban, Pakistan, or other governments are to have a country which should not create problem for them in the future, should be asking what is required. The question you and me are asking, we are not coming from another planet, we are here. We think these are right, and I'm sure the US government and other Western governments know what is the right thing. Like why it has to be Taliban. I'm giving you this power that you should allow women to be a minister, so I will pay you the money. That shouldn't be. Your government shouldn't be allowed if you will not get UN recognition ever if it is something that is totally outside the dynamic of the world. So I think these countries should see the Taliban, this kind of situation, as a threat to themselves rather than the threat to this specific country internally.
Well, Lima, thank you very much indeed. That we have to wrap it up because we stick to an hour. But in the meantime, Lima Halima-Ahmad and Jennifer Murtashvili, thank you both very much indeed for a very informative hour.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.